Commander Elias Vance had learned to be invisible, and in the cold halls of the Valkyrie flagship, invisibility was the only thing keeping him alive. The year was 2347, and humanity had discovered it was not alone in the universe, though the discovery had brought little joy. For the Valkyrie Dominion viewed humans the way humans might view clever insects, interesting enough to study, but certainly not equals. Elias walked through corridors that hummed with energy he could not see, past drones that clicked and chattered in their strange pheromone language. And he kept his eyes down, because that was what survivors did. He had been a soldier once, back when Earth still believed it could fight its way to respect among the stars. But those days were gone now, and Elias had traded his rifle for a neural implant that let him translate the untranslatable. The implant sat at the base of his skull, a small piece of human engineering that could interpret the complex chemical signals the Valkyrie used to communicate. And it was this device that made him valuable enough to be kept. Though never valuable enough to be respected, his assignment was simple: serve aboard the flagship of Queen Silithra, translate when needed, observe everything, and never forget that he was expendable. The Valkyrie were insectoid beings, though calling them insects felt like calling a hurricane a gentle breeze. For they stood 8 feet tall with exoskeletons that shimmered like liquid metal and compound eyes that saw spectrums. Humans could only dream of. Their queens were telepaths, connected to millions of minds at once, ruling through a web of consciousness that stretched across star systems. And among all the queens of the Dominion, Silithra was the youngest and the strangest. Elias had been aboard her ship for 3 months now, and in that time he had learned several things. He had learned that the Valkyrie found human emotions to be a source of endless confusion. They called it the attachment disorder, this strange human need to bond with others, to love and grieve and hope. He had learned that showing too much feeling in their presence made them uncomfortable, the way a human might feel uncomfortable watching someone talk to an imaginary friend. And he had learned, much to his surprise, that Queen Silithra was not like the others. The first time he noticed it, he thought he had imagined it, had been walking through the observation deck late in the ship's artificial night, unable to sleep because his dreams were full of Earth and a wife who had died in the first days of contact. When he heard human music, it was soft and sad, a piano piece he remembered from his childhood. And it was coming from the Queen's private viewing chamber. Elias knew he should leave, knew that spying on a Valkyrie monarch was a death sentence. But something pulled him forward, curiosity, perhaps, or that reckless human need to understand. He found a shadow near the entrance and looked inside. Queen Silithra sat alone before a massive display screen, her forearms folded in her lap, her compound eyes reflecting the images that played before her. She was watching humans, not war footage, not political broadcasts, but something far more unexpected. She was watching a wedding, an old recording from Earth, with flowers and music and 2 people promising to love each other forever. Elias felt his breath catch in his throat. He had seen Valkyrie queens command fleets and crush rebellions, had watched them make decisions that affected billions without a flicker of emotion. But he had never seen one look the way Silithra looked now. She looked hungry, not for food or power, but for something she could not name, something her species had evolved beyond, or perhaps had never possessed at all. She looked lonely. The realization hit Elias like a physical blow, because loneliness was supposed to be a human weakness, a flaw in their primitive social programming. And yet here was one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, surrounded by millions of minds she could touch at will. And she was utterly alone. He must have made a sound, or perhaps his emotions were strong enough for her to sense, because suddenly her head turned, and those massive eyes found him in the shadows. Elias froze. For a long moment, neither of them moved, and Elias was certain he was about to die. certain that she would summon her guards and have him executed for this violation. But she did not instead. Queen Selythra simply turned back to the screen, and her voice entered his mind, not through sound, but through the neural link his implant provided. "You grieve," she said. And it was not a question. Ilias swallowed hard and stepped out of the shadows, because hiding now would only make things worse. "Yes, Your Majesty," he said aloud, because speaking felt safer than thinking at her. "For the female," Selythra continued, and an image flickered across his mind, his wife Sarah, pulled from his own memories without his permission. "She is dead, and yet you carry her still. Why?" It was not a cruel question, Elias realized, but a genuinely confused one. "Because I loved her," he said simply. "Love," the queen repeated, and the word sounded strange in his mind, like she was tasting something foreign. "This is the attachment disorder, yes? The irrational bonding that serves no evolutionary purpose." "It serves a purpose," Elias said, and he was surprised by the strength in his own voice. "It gives us something to live for, something beyond survival." Selythra was silent for a long time, her eyes still fixed on the wedding playing before her. "These two humans," she finally said, gesturing to the screen. "They make promises they cannot keep. They speak of forever when they are so temporary. They bind themselves to pain they do not need to feel, and yet they weep with joy." "I do not understand." Elias looked at the screen, at the bride and groom holding hands, at the tears streaming down their faces, and he felt his own eyes grow wet. "That is because you are trying to understand it with your mind," he said quietly. "But love is not meant to be understood, Your Majesty. It is meant to be felt." The queen turned to look at him again, and for just a moment, Elias could have sworn he saw something flicker in those alien eyes, something almost like recognition, almost like want. "You may go, translator," she said, and the connection between their minds went silent. Elias bowed and retreated, his heart pounding, his thoughts racing. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he lay in his small quarters and stared at the ceiling and thought about a lonely queen watching human weddings in the dark. And he wondered if perhaps the Valkyrie were not so different from humans after all. Perhaps they had simply forgotten how to feel, or perhaps they had never learned it, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was why Selythra watched those old Earth recordings with such desperate hunger in her eyes, because somewhere deep inside her ancient and powerful mind, she knew she was missing something important, something that humans, for all their primitive weakness, had never lost. Elias closed his eyes and thought of Sarah, of their wedding day, of the way she had laughed when he stumbled over his vows, and for the first time since arriving on this ship, he did not feel entirely alone. The war came without warning, as wars often do. And suddenly, Elias found himself trapped on an alien ship, surrounded by beings who now had every reason to kill him. A rogue human colony on the edge of explored space had attacked a Valkyrie outpost, destroying it completely and killing thousands. And though Earth's government condemned the attack and begged for peace, the damage was done the Valkyrie Dominion wanted. Bloody Elias received the news from a drone who delivered it with the same tone one might use to announce dinner. He was to remain aboard the flagship as a gesture of good faith, which was diplomatic language for hostage. The other humans on the ship were sent away, transferred to holding facilities on distant worlds. But Elias stayed because the queen had requested. I did not know whether to be grateful or terrified in the days that followed. The ship became a different place, colder and more hostile, with drones watching him wherever he went and whispers following him through the corridors. But the strangest change was in Queen Selythra herself. She began to summon him. At first, it was for translation work, official communications with human diplomats. That required his particular skills, but soon the summons came for other reasons that made no sense to her court. She wanted to talk "Tell me about your cities," she said one evening. Her massive form settled on a platform that served as her throne. "I have seen images, but images do not explain why you build them so close together. Why you crowd yourselves into small spaces when you have entire planets to spread across." Elias stood before her, trying not to show his nervousness, because nervousness was weakness and weakness was death. "We like to be near each other," he said. "Being alone is difficult for us." "But you were alone," Scifistories observed. "On this ship for months, you were alone among beings who do not think like you or feel like you. And yet, you did not break. Why?" Elias considered the question carefully. "Because I carried others with me," he finally said. "My memories of them, my love for them, even though they are gone. They are still here." He touched his chest. "Humans are never truly alone, Your Majesty. Not as long as we can remember." The Queen was silent for a long moment, and Elias felt something brush against his mind. Not words, but a kind of pressure, as if she were trying to see inside him without actually looking. "This is why you weep for the dead," she said slowly. "You do not weep because they are gone. You weep because they are still with you, and it hurts." "Yes," Elias said, and he was surprised by how much it meant that she understood. "I do not weep," Scifistories said, and there was something in her voice that might have been sadness. "I do not remember, not in the way you mean. When one of my kind dies, they simply stop existing in the network. They are there, and then they are not. There is no carrying, no holding, just absence." "That sounds lonely," Elias said before he could stop himself. He expected anger, expected to be punished for speaking so freely to a queen. But instead Scifistories made a sound he had never heard from a Valkyrie before, something almost like a laugh. "It is lonely," she admitted. "I am connected to millions of minds. Translator, I feel them all, every thought and fear and hunger. And yet none of them truly know me. They cannot. They only see the Queen, the function, the role, not the being beneath." She turned to look at him with those vast compound eyes. "But you do not see the Queen when you look at me, do you?" Elias's heart hammered in his chest. "No, Your Majesty," he said honestly. "I see someone watching human weddings in the dark and wondering what she is missing." The silence that followed was so complete that Elias could hear his own blood rushing through his veins. Then, Scifistories did something extraordinary. She rose from her platform and moved toward him, her massive form casting shadows across the floor. And she stopped just close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body. "My advisors believe you have corrupted me," she said quietly. "They say that proximity to humans has weakened my mind, infected me with your attachment disorder. They want me to execute you to prove my loyalty to the Dominion." Elias felt cold fear wash through him, but he did not look away. "And what do you believe, Your Majesty?" "I believe," Scifistories said slowly, "that something is happening to me that I do not understand. I think about you when you are not here. I wonder what you would say about things. I feel something when I see you that I have never felt before, and it frightens me." She reached out with one of her 4 arms and touched his face, a gesture so human that it made his breath catch. "What is this feeling, Elias Vance?" "This weight in my chest that grows heavier each day. This need to be near you that serves no logical purpose. This pain I feel when I imagine you gone." Elias looked up at her, this alien queen who ruled star systems and commanded fleets, and he saw in her eyes the same terrified wonder he remembered from his own youth, when he had first realized he was falling in love. "I think you know what it is," he said gently. "I think you have always known. You just did not have a word for it." "We have no word for it," she admitted. "My people have no word because we do not feel it. We are not supposed to feel it, and yet here I am outside the chamber." Elias could hear her advisors gathering, their pheromone chatter urgent and angry, demanding an audience with their queen. They will want an answer soon, Sci-Fi said. They will want to know if I am loyal to the Dominion or if I have been compromised by human weakness. And what will you tell them? The Queen looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something that no Valkyrie monarch had done in recorded history. She lowered herself until her eyes were level with his, until they were face to face like equals. I will tell them that humans are not weak, she said. I will tell them that any species capable of feeling what I feel now could never be weak. I will tell them that what they call a disorder is actually a gift, and that perhaps the Valkyrie have been missing something important all along. She straightened and moved toward the door, where her advisors waited. Stay here, she commanded. I will return. Elias watched her go, and as the doors closed behind her, he realized his hands were shaking, not from fear, from hope, because somewhere in the vast cold universe, against all odds and all reason, an alien queen had just defended humanity, not because of their technology or their resources or their strategic value, but because a single human had taught her how to feel, and that, Elias thought, was exactly what humans did best. They taught the universe how to love. The cell was cold and dark, but Elias had stopped noticing either of those things hours ago. His mind was too full of everything that had happened, too heavy with the knowledge that tomorrow he would die. The High Conclave had spoken, and their judgment was absolute. Queen Sci-Fi had defended humanity too fiercely, had shown too much weakness, and the only way to prove her loyalty now was to execute the human who had corrupted her. Elias sat on the hard floor with his back against the wall and thought about Sarah, about the life they had planned together, about all the futures that had died when she did. He wondered if he would see her again. Wherever humans went when they stopped breathing, he wondered if it would hurt. The door to his cell opened without warning, and Elias looked up to find Queen Sci-Fi standing in the entrance, her massive form blocking out the light from the corridor beyond. She was alone. Your Majesty, Elias said, and he tried to stand, but his legs would not cooperate. I did not expect. Do not get up, she said, and she entered the cell and sealed the door behind her. I did not come as your queen. I came as myself. She lowered herself to the floor across from him, folding her legs beneath her in a way that must have been uncomfortable for her anatomy. And for a long moment they simply looked at each other. I failed, Sci-Fi said finally, and her voice in his mind was heavy with something he had never felt from her before: shame. I spoke to the conclave for hours. I argued and reasoned and even threatened, but they would not listen. They are afraid of what I have become, afraid of what it means for our species, and fear makes them cruel. You tried, Elias said. That is more than I expected, more than I deserved. You deserve more than I can give you, she said, and the words seemed to cost her something. You deserve to live. Elias Vance, you deserve to go home and find another mate and have the children your species values so much. But I cannot save you, not without destroying everything I have built, everything my people need me to be. Elias nodded slowly. He had known this was coming, had known from the moment war was declared that his story would end here, in the dark, far from everything he loved. I understand, he said, and he meant it. Sci-Fi moved closer to him, close enough that he could feel her warmth again, close enough that their minds brushed against each other without either of them meaning to. I have to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer honestly. I have never lied to you. Your Majesty, Sci-Fi, she corrected. Tonight I am just Sci-Fi, please. Elias felt something shift in his chest, something painful and beautiful at the same time. What do you want to ask me? Sci-Fi? She was quiet for so long that Elias thought she might not answer at all, but then she spoke, and her voice was smaller than he had ever heard it. If you could have anything, she said, any wish granted before the end, anything at all, what would it be? Elias thought about the question. He thought about asking for freedom, about begging for his life, about demanding safe passage back to Earth, where he could live out whatever years he had left. He thought about asking for revenge, for the power to make the Conclave pay for their cruelty. He thought about asking for answers, for the chance to understand why the universe had brought him here only to let him die. But when he opened his mouth, none of those words came out instead. He looked at Salithra, really looked at her, past the exoskeleton and the compound eyes and the alien form. And he saw what he had seen that first night in the observation deck. He saw loneliness so deep it had become its own kind of gravity. Saw a hunger for connection that her species had never learned to fill. Saw a being who had lived for centuries and ruled star systems and touched millions of minds, and who had never once been truly known. And he saw something else, something that made his heart ache with recognition. He saw himself. "I would wish to marry you," he whispered, so quietly that he was not even sure she could hear him. "Not for alliance, not for politics, not to save my life or change the outcome of anything. Just because when I am with you, the universe makes sense. Just because you are the most remarkable person I have ever known. Just because I love you and I wanted you to. Know it before I die." The words hung in the air between them. Fragile and impossible, Elias closed his eyes because he could not bear to see her reaction, could not bear to watch her pull away or laugh or pity him for his foolish human feelings. But she did not pull away, she did not laugh. Instead, he felt her mind press against his, not with words, but with something deeper. Something that felt like a door opening for the first time in centuries. And then she spoke. "I accept." Elias's eyes flew open. "What?" "I accept," Salithra repeated, and there was something in her voice he had never heard before, not from her. Not from any Valkyrie. "Your wish, your proposal, your love, I accept all of it." "Salithra, I did not mean you do not have to." "I know I do not have to," she said, and she reached out and touched his face the way she had done once before. "That is why I am choosing to, do you understand? For the first time in my existence, I am choosing something not because it is logical, or necessary, or expected, but because I want it. Because I want you. But the Conclave does not know what they have done," Salithra said, and suddenly there was steel in her voice. The steel of a queen who had decided something and would not be moved. "In our ancient law, there is a rite so old that most believe it to be myth, the bonding of disparate souls. A ceremony that allows two beings of different kinds to join in a union that is absolute and unbreakable." She leaned closer to him. "When a queen invokes this rite, it cannot be refused. It cannot be overturned. It cannot be undone. And I invoke it now. I invoke it for you, Elias Vance, human of Earth. I claim you as my bonded mate before the old laws and the old powers, and no force in this galaxy can separate what I have joined." Elias stared at her, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. "You would do this?" He breathed. "You would defy everything, risk everything for me?" "You taught me what love means," Salithra said simply. "You taught me that it is not weakness to want someone, not foolishness to need them. You showed me that the greatest strength in the universe is not power or logic or even survival, but the courage to open yourself to another being completely." She pressed her forehead against his, and for the first time, Elias felt what she felt: centuries of loneliness, of hunger, of searching for something she could not name, all of it finally finding an answer in him. "I will not let you die," she said. "I will not let them take you from me. Tomorrow we will stand before the Conclave together, and I will show them what humans have taught me. I will show them that love is not a disorder. It is the only thing that matters." Elias reached up and placed his hands on either side of her face. This alien queen who had just changed everything, who had just saved him in ways that went far beyond his physical life. "I love you," he said, because they were the only words that mattered, the only truth worth speaking. "I know," she replied. And through their connection, he felt her love in return, vast and ancient and fierce. Different from human love, but no less real. No less true. I love you too, and I am done being afraid of it. They stayed there together in the dark, human and alien. Prisoner and queen, two lonely souls who had found each other across the impossible gulf of species and stars. Outside the cell, the universe waited to see what would happen when love refused to stay invisible. The conclave chamber was vast and ancient, carved from stone that had watched the rise and fall of empires. And today it held more tension than it had held in 1,000 years. Elias stood beside Queen Selithra, his hand in hers, a gesture that had caused gasps of shock from the assembled Valkyrie nobles, and he tried not to let his fear show on his face. Around them stood the other queens of the Dominion, 30 massive beings who ruled over billions, their compound eyes fixed on Selithra, with expressions that ranged from disgust to fascination to barely concealed rage. The High Arbiter, the oldest and most powerful of them all, spoke first. "You have invoked the bonding of disparate souls," she said, and her voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "A rite so ancient that many of us believed it lost. A rite that has not been performed in 40,000 years. And you have invoked it for a human." "I have," Selithra said, and her voice did not waver. "Do you understand what you have done?" Another queen demanded, her forearms spread wide in outrage. "You have made this creature your equal under our oldest laws. You have given a primitive being standing in our conclave. You have shamed us all. I have done what no Valkyrie has had the courage to do in millennia," Selithra replied. "I have chosen love over logic, connection over control. And if that shames you, then perhaps the shame is deserved." The chamber erupted in angry pheromone speech, and Elias felt Selithra's grip on his hand tighten. "This is madness," the High Arbiter declared. "This is the corruption we feared, the human weakness infecting our kind. You must renounce this bonding." I must do nothing," Selithra interrupted, and her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "That is the point of the old rite, is it not? Once invoked, it cannot be undone. Once spoken, it cannot be unspoken. I am bonded to this human until death claims one of us. And there is nothing any of you can do to change that. We can remove you from your throne," another queen hissed. "We can strip you of your hive, exile you to the outer reaches. You can try," Selithra said. "But before you do, I would ask you all to consider something. To consider why I have done this. To consider what the humans might offer us that we have been too proud and too afraid to accept." She released Elias's hand and stepped forward, facing her fellow queens with the bearing of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I have ruled for 3 centuries, she said. "I have touched the minds of millions. I have won wars and forged alliances and built empires. And in all that time, I have never once been happy, never once felt complete, never once understood why existence seemed so hollow even when I had everything our kind values." She turned and looked at Elias, and then I met a human, a translator, a nobody by our standards, and he showed me what we had lost. He showed me that the attachment disorder we mock is not a weakness but a strength. He showed me that love, real love, the kind that makes you willing to sacrifice everything, is the most powerful force in the universe. "Pretty words," the High Arbiter said coldly. "But words do not change biology. Words do not undo millions of years of evolution. We are not meant to feel as humans feel. Are you certain?" Selithra asked. "Because I feel it. I feel love so strongly that it has changed everything I am, and I am Valkyrie, born of the same biology as all of you. What if the capacity was always there? What if we simply forgot how to access it?" She gestured to Elias. "The bonding rite exists for a reason. Our ancestors created it because they understood something we have forgotten. They understood that connection to other beings, real connection, not just the network, not just the hive, is essential to what we are." The chamber had grown quiet, And Elias saw something he had not expected on the faces of some of the queens, not anger, but curiosity, perhaps even longing. I propose something unprecedented, Saelithra continued. I propose that we complete the bonding ceremony in full. Not just the legal invocation, but the actual ritual. The joining of minds and souls that our ancestors designed. And I propose that every queen in this chamber witness it. Why? The High Arbiter demanded, because when the ritual is complete, you will feel what I feel, Saelithra said. Through the network, through our connection, you will experience human love for yourselves. And then you can judge whether it is weakness or strength. Elias felt his heart racing as the queens conferred among themselves. Their pheromone speech too fast and complex for even his implant to fully interpret finally. The High Arbiter spoke. We will allow this, she said. Not because we believe you, but because we must understand the nature of this threat. If human emotion is truly infectious, then we must know its full extent. It is not a threat, Saelithra said. But you will see that for yourselves. The ceremony began at sunset, not that there was a real sun on the ship. But the Valkyrie had programmed their artificial sky to mark the occasion. Painting the chamber in shades of gold and purple, Elias stood at the center of a circle drawn in light, with Saelithra across from him, and around them stood the 13 queens of the Dominion, witnesses to something that had not happened since before humanity had discovered fire. Are you afraid? Saelithra asked through their mental link. Terrified, Elias admitted. But I would rather be terrified with you than safe without you. That is the most human thing you have ever said, she replied. And he felt her amusement like warm light in his mind. I love that about you. The ritual began with words, ancient Valkyrie phrases that Elias did not understand but could feel the weight of. Words that spoke of unity and permanence and the binding of two souls into one. Then came the exchange of vows. Saelithra had asked Elias to teach her human wedding traditions. And so they had created something new, half Valkyrie ceremony, half human wedding. A bridge between two worlds. I take you as my partner, Elias said, speaking aloud while his thoughts echoed through the network to every queen present. Not because it is logical, not because it benefits me, but because my heart recognized yours the moment we met. Because loving you has made me more than I was. Because I cannot imagine facing the universe without you beside me. I take you as my bonded mate, Saelithra replied. Not because our laws demand it, not because tradition permits it, but because you taught me that there is more to existence than survival. You showed me that vulnerability is not weakness. You gave me the most precious gift any being can give. You saw me, truly saw me, and you did not look away. The final part of the ceremony required the joining of minds, not the surface connection they had shared before, but something deeper, a complete merging that would leave permanent traces on both of them. Saelithra opened herself fully, and Elias did the same, and for one blazing moment, they were not two beings, but one, and through the network. Every queen in the chamber felt it too. They felt Elias's love, raw and fierce and terrifyingly vulnerable. A love that did not calculate costs or benefits. A love that simply was. Overwhelming and irrational and beautiful. They felt Saelithra's love in return, ancient and vast, but no less real. A love that had waited centuries to find its object. A love that had nearly died in the cold logic of Valkyrie existence before a single human had rekindled it, and they felt something else. Something none of them had expected. They felt their own hearts, or whatever passed for hearts in their biology, ache with recognition because the capacity for love had always been there, buried deep beneath millions of years of evolution and socialization, waiting for someone brave enough to dig it out when the ceremony ended and the connection faded. Elias opened his eyes to find the chamber silent, but it was not the silence of disapproval. It was the silence of beings who had just discovered a new color, a new sense, A new dimension of existence they had never known was possible, and one by one, the queens of the Valkyrie Dominion began to weep for the first time in their evolutionary history. They wept not from pain or loss, but from the overwhelming beauty of what they had just experienced. The High Arbiter approached Saelithra with tears still glistening on her alien face. "What have you done to us?" she whispered. "I have reminded you what you are," Saelithra said simply. "We are not machines. We are not networks. We are beings capable of love. And the humans can teach us how to feel it again." She reached out and took Elias's hand once more. "This is not infection," she said. "This is awakening." 10 years had passed since the ceremony that changed everything, and the galaxy had become a very different place. Elias stood at the window of the royal quarters, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so cold and hostile, and he smiled at how much had changed, not just in the universe, but in himself. He was no longer the invisible translator who kept his head down and hoped to survive another day. He was the consort of Queen Saelithra, the first human to hold rank in the Valkyrie Dominion, a symbol of the new alliance between species that had once seemed destined for war. But more importantly, he was a husband. "You are thinking too loudly," Saelithra said from behind him, and he felt her approach through their bond before her arms wrapped around him. "I can feel your memories from across the ship. I was thinking about the day we met," he admitted, leaning back into her embrace, "about how certain I was that I would die on this ship. How impossible it seemed that anything good could happen. And now I wake up every morning next to the most remarkable being in the galaxy, and I still cannot quite believe it is real." Saelithra made that sound he had learned to recognize as laughter, a sound that had once been completely foreign to the Valkyrie, but was now heard throughout the Dominion. "You humans and your disbelief," she said fondly. "After 10 years you would think you would have adjusted." "Never," Elias said, turning to face her. "I hope I never stop being amazed by you. I hope I never take any of this for granted." Outside their quarters, the ship hummed with activity. Valkyrie and humans working side by side, a sight that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. The war had never happened. In the weeks following the ceremony, as the queens of the Dominion processed what they had experienced, something extraordinary had occurred. They had wanted more. They had wanted to understand human emotion, to learn how to access the capacity for love that had always existed within them, to feel the connection that Saelithra and Elias shared, and humans, being humans, had been more than happy to help. Emotional consultants had become humanity's greatest export therapists and artists and poets and ordinary people who could teach aliens how to feel, how to love, how to connect in ways that went beyond telepathy and networks. Human art and music and literature had become the most valuable commodities in the galaxy, not for their technical merit, but for the feelings they evoked, and slowly, generation by generation, the Valkyrie had begun to change. "The council meets in an hour," Saelithra reminded him. "They want to discuss the new cultural exchange programs with Earth." "Another hour of listening to bureaucrats argue about funding?" Elias groaned. "Another hour of shaping the future of two species," Saelithra corrected. "And you are the one who insisted that this was important work." I know, he sighed. "I just miss the days when it was just the two of us against the galaxy." "Those days were terrible," Saelithra said flatly. "You were in a cell and I was about to be deposed. I much prefer our current situation." Elias laughed because she was right, because she was always right. Because even after 10 years, she could still surprise him with her humor and her wisdom and her love. The council meeting went well. Elias had learned over the years how to navigate Valkyrie politics. And more importantly, he had learned that the best way to convince anyone of anything was simply to be honest. Honesty had been his greatest weapon from the very beginning. After all, it was what had made Saelithra trust him. What had allowed him to see past her crown to the loneliness beneath? What had given him the courage to whisper his impossible wish in a dark cell 10 years ago? After the meeting, Selithra was summoned to address the Galactic Assembly, a gathering of representatives from over 100 species. All of them watching to see what the Valkyrie Queen would say, stood in the audience as she took her place at the center of the vast chamber. Her form bathed in light, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. "I speak to you today not as a queen," she began, "but as someone who was once lost and has been found. As someone who discovered a truth that I believe the entire galaxy needs to hear." The assembly fell silent for millions of years. "My species believed that emotion was primitive," Selithra continued. "We believed that logic and efficiency were the highest virtues, that attachment was weakness, that love was a disorder to be pitied rather than celebrated." She paused, and Elias felt her reach for him through their bond, drawing strength from his presence. "We were wrong." The words echoed through the chamber, and Elias saw beings of every shape and size leaning forward to listen 10 years ago. "A human taught me what my entire civilization had forgotten," Selithra said. "He taught me that feeling is not weakness. He showed me that love is not a disorder, but a gift. He demonstrated that the species we had dismissed as primitive possessed something we desperately needed." She turned slightly, and her eyes found Elias in the crowd. "Humans do not love because it is logical," she said. "They do not form bonds because it benefits them. They love because they cannot imagine existing any other way. They connect because connection is the very essence of who they are." She addressed the assembly again, and now, "Neither can I, neither can my people. We have learned from humanity the most important lesson the universe has to offer, that the greatest strength is not power or intelligence or longevity, but the courage to open yourself to another being completely, the willingness to be vulnerable, the capacity to love without reservation." Selithra straightened to her full height. "The Valkyrie Dominion once considered humanity to be a minor species, barely worth noticing," she said. "We know better now. They have changed us in ways we never thought possible. They have given us back something we lost so long ago we forgot. It was missing, and for that, we owe them more than we can ever repay." She looked out at the assembled representatives. "I encourage every species here to learn from humanity as we have," she concluded. "Open yourselves to their strange and beautiful ways. Let them teach you how to feel. You may find, as we did, that love is the only thing that truly matters." The assembly erupted in response, some cheering, some arguing, some sitting in stunned silence. But Elias barely heard any of it, was too busy feeling Selithra's love through their bond. Vast and warm and endlessly grateful later that night, back in their quarters, Elias asked her the question that had been on his mind all day. "Do you have any regrets?" He said, "Any at all?" Selithra considered the question, her mind touching his through their connection, feeling his warmth and his steadiness and his endless hope. "Only one." She finally said. Elias felt a flash of worry. "What is it?" "That you whispered," she said, and there was humor in her voice. "That night in the cell, when you made your wish. You should have shouted it from the rooftops." Elias smiled, remembering that impossible moment, that terrifying leap of faith. "Would you have believed me if I had?" He asked. Selithra pulled him close. This fragile and temporary and magnificent human who had somehow held the key to everything her species had been missing. "No," she admitted. "That is why it had to be a whisper. Humans understand something we never did. The most powerful truths are always the quietest ones." She pressed her forehead against his. "But now the whole galaxy knows," she said. "Now everyone has heard what you taught me, and nothing will ever be the same." Elias closed his eyes and felt her love surrounding him, felt the bond that connected them pulsing with warmth and light. "I love you," he said. Because it was the truth, because it was all that mattered. Because it was the whisper that had changed everything. I know, Sailithra replied. I love you too, my husband, my teacher, my art. Outside their window, the stars burned bright and cold. But neither of them felt alone anymore. They never would again, because that was what humans did. They taught the universe how to love. One whispered wish at a time, and the universe, after millions of years of cold silence, had finally learned to listen.